The swamp, hidden deep in South America, has been a source of fear for centuries. Locals call it El Pantano de las Sombras, the swamp of lost shadows. They warn travelers never to look too long into its waters. Legends speak of people losing their reflections after visiting the swamp. Some say those reflections don't disappear, they just move on their own. What happens after that is the part no one talks about. Years ago, a fisherman vanished near the swamp. His boat returned hours later, empty except for deep claw-like marks on its sides. His family swore they heard his voice calling from the water for days. Dr. Carver, a biologist, dismissed the stories as superstition and set out to investigate. He wanted proof, not ghost stories. But what he found was far stranger than he ever imagined. Carver camped near the swamp, setting up cameras and scientific equipment. For days, everything seemed quiet, almost unnervingly so. The water barely rippled, even when the wind blew. One night, his equipment picked up something unusual. A shadow-like figure appeared in the footage, rising from the swamp and mimicking Carver's gestures. But Carver was asleep in his tent at the time. The next morning, Carver woke to find his camp in chaos. His tent was slashed, his supplies were scattered, and wet footprints surrounded his sleeping bag. He hadn't left during the night. The water itself behaved strangely. Droplets didn't splash outward, they seemed to rise into the air. It was as if the swamp resisted being disturbed. Carver collected water samples and sent them to a lab. Initial tests revealed microorganisms glowing faintly under certain lights. They resembled tiny neural networks, pulsating as if alive. Locals told Carver the swamp wasn't just cursed, it was alive. Ancient carvings on nearby rocks depicted people worshipping a swirling pool of water, offering sacrifices to it. Carver dismissed the myths, but he couldn't explain the dreams he started having. In them, he stood in the swamp, surrounded by dark figures with glowing eyes. When he woke, he felt like something was watching him. His reflection in the swamp began to change. At first, it lagged behind his movements, like a glitch. Then one day, it stopped moving entirely, staring back at him as if it were alive. Carver began hearing whispers at night, soft voices calling his name. They seemed to come from the water, growing louder when he tried to ignore them. He wrote in his journal about losing chunks of time. He'd wake up hours later in different parts of the swamp, unsure how he got there. His shadow started looking thinner, lighter, as if it were fading. Locals warned him to leave, but he refused. He was too fascinated by the swamp, obsessed with uncovering its secrets. But the swamp seemed to be uncovering him instead. One day, Carver vanished. His camp was found abandoned, his journals scattered around the site. The final entry was haunting: "Don't trust the water. It's not water." After his disappearance, the government restricted access to the swamp. They claimed it was to protect the fragile ecosystem, but locals knew better. Helicopters and unmarked vans began arriving in the dead of night. Satellite images showed the swamp expanding rapidly, swallowing nearby land. Its growth seemed almost intentional, like it was alive and spreading. Villagers reported eerie sightings. Some claimed to see shadows moving through the trees at night. Others said their own reflections waved at them before disappearing into the swamp. Conspiracy theories exploded online. Some believed the swamp was the result of a secret government experiment, perhaps involving bioluminescent organisms. Others thought it was an ancient entity waking up. A whistleblower leaked a report from one of Carver's lab samples. It claimed the microorganisms in the swamp water could interface with human neural systems, influencing thoughts and memories. Researchers who analyzed the samples started experiencing strange symptoms. They complained of vivid nightmares, memory lapses, and an overwhelming fear of their own reflections. A few researchers disappeared entirely. Their homes were left untouched, except for mirrors shattered on the floors. The only clue was a faint trail of muddy footprints leading away. People who returned from the swamp weren't the same. Their reflections in mirrors lagged, moving seconds after they did. Some refused to look at mirrors ever again. Legends of the shadow sickness began to resurface. It was said that if a person lost their reflection in the swamp, their soul would slowly drain away, leaving them hollow and lifeless. Attempts to drain the swamp failed. Machinery broke down, workers fell ill, and the swamp regrew faster than it could be cleared. It was as if the swamp was protecting itself. Drones sent into the swamp captured chilling footage. Shadows formed humanoid shapes, reaching for the cameras before the feed cut out. The drones were never recovered. The swamp's water glowed faintly at night, as if the microorganisms were communicating. Some said the glow pulsed like a heartbeat, growing stronger each evening. Locals believed the swamp was preparing to spread further. Animals began disappearing, and trees near the edges started to die, their roots blackened and brittle. One hunter claimed to see his own reflection in the swamp, staring back at him with a twisted grin. When he looked again, it was gone, but his shadow felt heavier, as if it was dragging him down. The swamp's influence extended beyond its borders. People miles away reported hearing whispers in their sleep. Some woke up to find wet footprints around their beds. A rescue team sent to investigate never returned. Weeks later, their abandoned gear was found on the swamp's edge, covered in a strange black slime. The slime was analyzed, revealing the same glowing microorganisms. But these were larger, more complex, almost like they were evolving. One scientist theorized the swamp wasn't just alive, it was intelligent. The organisms inside were learning, adapting, and spreading. The swamp is now completely sealed off. Military checkpoints guard every road leading to it, and anyone caught entering disappears without explanation. Satellite images show the swamp glowing brighter every month. Some believe it's preparing for something, but no one knows what. Legends warn that the swamp will eventually consume everything. Its shadows will stretch across the land, pulling everyone and everything into its depths. Today, the Swamp of Lost Shadows remains one of the world's most forbidden places. Those who dare to look too closely might lose more than just their reflection, they might lose themselves entirely.